the private sector does to an individual to bring them to a level where they attain position of leadership and do well, and the public sector at times doesn't do?
The private sector, I mean, one of the things that I have come to learn in terms of getting in what I call the products from our institutions into the private sector is that we conduct certain kinds of competencies, tests, and you would be lucky if you get 20% having that pass mark to be invited for further discussions. Now, this is basically on the fundamentals, right? Communication skills, analytical skills, problem-solving skills, etc., etc. Now, we haven't even talked about personality profile analysis or the issue of attitude and character. You look at that, and the question basically speaks to the theme of this summit, which is transforming education. Now, anything that has to do with the word transformation or transformative means that there is a line of sight to leadership. Now, what I have noticed, generally speaking, be it in the private sector or in the public sector in Nigeria, is that we have a greater proportion of transactional leaders rather than transformative leaders. What do I mean by that? When you have to, and I think Mrs. Shola had indicated the issue of good governance. When was the last time you had your kid admitted to a Nigerian university without talking to anybody? We shared this at dinner yesterday, where you only correspond with the university through letters, fill out your form, pay your fees, and if they meet the pass mark, they admit the kid. If they don't, they don't. In Nigeria, you don't do that anymore. I think the last time something like this happened might probably be over 30 years ago. In most other economies in the world, you don't necessarily talk to anybody in the institution. In fact, you don't know anyone in the institution, and you get admitted, or your kid gets admitted, based purely on what they have accomplished. Okay. Now, that means that the leadership, be it in the educational institutions or in the greater society, are transactional by nature.
Okay, let me come to Jim then. Jim O'Neill. Across the rest of the world, the quality of education, it varies. You have the likes of Singapore and China and so on, where they're focused on a quality of training for their children that are taking them to where they are now. And if we look at Nigeria, we're saying we have a crisis. What are the things that you can put on the table in terms of leadership of the education sector that you will say, based on your experience of all your travels around the world, these are the things that you see as best practice that our leaders who are here today, the minister, the supervising minister of education is here, the vice president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria is here. What can they take away, and starting from tomorrow morning, they can begin to implement to change that sector?
You asked me a very easy question. You cite Singapore and China, one of the smallest. You cite Singapore and China, one of the smallest and the largest populated countries in the world, both of which, on simple numerical measures, appear to be amongst the best today in educational attainment. So there are things that I think can be learned from them, and if there were a couple of things, and I should also disclose as being Mr. Brick and Mr. Mintz, I sit on the board of something called Teach for All, which is a global umbrella organization of Teach for America, Teach First in the UK, which is about trying to persuade the brightest students when they finish university to commit some of their time to teaching in the most impoverished neighborhoods. And there's a Teach for China. And I know there is some conversations beginning about a Teach for Nigeria. For a population of this size and with the scale of the challenge, I don't know if Teach for Nigeria would be a transformational thing, but I think trying to persuade the brightest people that there is a purpose in life by devoting it to being a teacher, I think is an absolute critical thing, which is certainly something that is going on in Shanghai today, which is so powerful.
Okay, the brightest in our institutions to be encouraged to go into teaching. That would help to change. Let me come back to His Excellency the Governor now. Now, one of the key things for quite a few people is they look at those who are in the helm of affairs in government and sometimes ministries and parastatals. And their question is, what kind of leader are they? And how can they sincerely and honestly beat their chest and say they have a passion to develop the next generation? What is your thought about this expression by Nigerians, because it will impact on how we move from here on?
Thank you very much, sir. Let me just clarify and reassure the Honorable Minister of National Planning. My comments about the students selected is more of a positive comment for the federal government-owned schools. I'm just saying that if state-owned schools, state government owns public schools, if our people do as well as these, then there is no crisis. So I think your response suggests as if I was criticizing the federal government. But in any case, all of us are in the bar of public opinion. We must be criticized, including the Vice President, including myself, and including yourself. I don't want us to take this to be party issues. The other second point I wanted to make is that I tried to imagine somebody having to shut down the oil sector for 48 hours. No crude is lifted from Nigeria. There will be riots all over Nigeria. Abuja will not be at peace. Edo will not be at peace. But we shut down our schools, and yet everything is going fine. Universities are shut down, I mean polytechnics. And it's not even featuring in this discussion. So please don't say this, don't see it in terms of criticizing you or federal government. It's about recognizing that whereas these are very promising, very exciting, out there it is not exactly the same. I hope you do understand, so you don't persecute me for this. However, I think the real issue for me is for us as leaders to show courage. There are powerful vested interests in the educational sector. In Edo State, I found that we have schools without roof, we have schools with potholes in the classroom, and I said, no, we must first deal with this. Now we build beautiful schools, far more attractive than any private school. But the missing link is the quality of the teachers. Now, I came across a teacher who could not distinguish between I and one. Between I solemnly declare. This is reading his own affidavit. And he said, one Solomon. Now, this for me is not something I want to celebrate. And I'm like, it's okay. We were showing on television beautiful schools, beautiful furnitures, but what we couldn't show is the heart of competent and beautiful teachers. How have I tried to deal with that? I've said, okay, now that I know we have a snake in the classroom, it can no longer be business as usual. We must revisit the question, who is a teacher? What does it take to be a teacher? And to do that, we need to do what I call assessment tests of everybody who is in our classrooms. And of course, there are challenges. And that's where leadership comes in. Somebody said to me, election is coming in 2011. You are to organize the teachers. And I'm like, why should I be a governor if I cannot